In a remote northern town, a man posts a house for sale sign and turns away from the animals he once kept. A rusted cage sits in the snow, a trembling note that reads, "Free owner moved, please take," and a silence that feels wrong. Inside, a German Shepherd mother and her puppies are freezing, discarded like they never mattered. A Navy SEAL has never owned a dog, but one look tells him this isn't coincidence. He can't ignore it. He won't let them suffer 1 second more. The moment he opens that cage will expose a hidden crime, wake a silent town, and change his life forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Then like the video and subscribe to the channel. The winter road into Brightwater looked harmless at noon, almost kind. The sky was a hard, flawless blue, the sort that only appears when the cold has scrubbed every weakness from the air. Sunlight bounced off the snowbanks lining the road, turning them into sheets of broken glass. Silas Mercer drove with the window cracked just enough to let the cold bite his face. He preferred it that way. Sharp air kept him present. Softness made his thoughts wander. At 40, Silas had the build of a man who had learned discipline young and never fully set it down. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, his strength compact rather than showy, more endurance than bulk. His dark brown hair was kept in a clean undercut, always precise, always controlled, as if chaos were something that might creep in through untidy edges. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with a strong jaw and cheekbones that caught the light when he turned his head. His eyes, blue-gray and unusually steady, had the distant focus of someone who observed before speaking, someone trained to measure risk instinctively. A faint limp followed his right step, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. Most people weren't. Brightwater appeared suddenly after a curve in the road, a small northern town resting beside a frozen lake. Houses sat spaced apart, roofs heavy with snow, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. It was bright, quiet, and deceptively peaceful. Silas slowed as he passed a wooden house with a real estate sign staked crookedly into the yard. The place looked like it was leaving in a hurry. Cardboard boxes were stacked near the porch, some collapsed under melting snow, others split open, their contents, books, mismatched shoes, a broken lamp, spilling out as if abandoned mid-thought. He would have driven past if not for the shape behind the fence. The fence was old cedar, slats uneven, tall enough to block the view from the main road. Behind it sat a metal cage, its bars dull with rust, its base half buried in snow. A piece of cardboard was taped to the top, the corners curling from moisture. The handwriting was uneven, the marker pressed too hard in places, too light in others, as if the person who wrote it hadn't been steady. Free. Owner moved. Please take. Silas stopped the truck. For a moment he stayed seated, hands resting on the steering wheel, breath fogging the windshield. He didn't move because he already knew what he would see when he did. The pause was not hesitation. It was recognition. Inside the cage, a German Shepherd lay curled tightly around 3 small shapes. The dog was female, young, perhaps 3 years old, but exhaustion had thinned her frame. Her black and tan coat was stiff with frost, the longer hairs around her neck tipped white where ice had formed. Her body shook in small, involuntary tremors as she pressed herself over her puppies, trying to give them what warmth she had left. The pups were so still that Silas had to watch their sides carefully to be sure they were breathing. The mother's eyes lifted when she sensed him. They were dark brown, rimmed red from cold and strain, alert despite everything. She did not bark. She did not growl. She simply watched him, her body tensing, her head lowering instinctively over the puppies. Silas stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. He wore a military camouflage uniform, long-sleeved top and matching trousers, neatly fitted, practical rather than ceremonial. A dark tactical belt circled his waist, carrying a few utility pouches and a holster meant for tools, not weapons. Tan combat boots reached high over his ankles, their thick soles made for rough ground and worse weather. A heavy metal watch with a black face sat on his wrist, the only piece of luxury he allowed himself. He had not changed since leaving the service. Some habits were easier to keep than to explain. The front door of the house opened. A man stepped out, average. Height, early 50s perhaps, with thinning hair and a padded jacket that looked too clean for someone moving in winter. He avoided Silas's eyes, focusing instead on the snow near his feet. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his posture defensive rather than tired. "You here for the house?" the man asked, his voice flat. Silas nodded once. "What about the dogs?" The man shrugged, quick and practiced. "Can't take them with me. Didn't plan on it. They're free. Someone will want them." He said it the way people said things they didn't want to think about too long. Silas looked back at the cage. The mother dog's gaze never left the house behind the man. Her eyes tracked the doorway, not Silas, not the road, the house. "How long have they been out here?" Silas asked. The man's shrug came again, a little sharper this time. "Couple hours, maybe more. Look, I've got a schedule." Silas didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He did what he had learned to do long ago. Act. He took off his jacket, a thick outer layer meant to cut wind, and draped it over the cage, blocking the draft. The mother dog flinched at first, then settled when the wind stopped clawing at her fur. Silas crouched low, keeping his movements slow and visible. He could see now, up close, the faint indentation around the dog's neck, a healed mark, old but unmistakable, the kind left by a rope or wire pulled too tight for too long. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. It was ordinary. He slid his arms beneath the cage, metal biting cold through his sleeves, and lifted. The weight surprised him, not heavy, but awkward, unbalanced. The puppies whimpered faintly, a sound so small it barely reached the air. The mother dog stiffened, then adjusted her body, curling tighter around them. The man by the door said nothing as Silas carried the cage to his truck. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say goodbye. Silas placed the cage gently in the back seat, bracing it with blankets he kept for winter driving. Before closing the door, he paused. The mother dog met his eyes at last. Her gaze was steady, searching, not pleading, measuring. "It's all right," Silas said quietly, unsure who he was saying it for. As he drove away, the house receded in the rearview mirror, its windows dark, its porch empty. The road curved, and the house disappeared. That should have been the end of it. Rescue made. Problem solved. But halfway down the street, the dog did something strange. She shifted inside the cage and lifted her head, pressing her nose hard against the bars on one side. Her eyes were no longer on Silas. They were fixed on the space where the house had been, long after it vanished from sight. Her body went rigid, a low sound vibrating in her chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but something quieter, deeper. A warning, perhaps, or a memory refusing to let go. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He had seen that look before, in men, not animals. The look of a place that had taken something it would not give back. He drove on. The cabin he rented sat on a low hill overlooking Brightwater, small and plain, with a wide window facing the frozen lake. Inside, it was clean and bare, the kind of space meant for temporary stays. Silas set the cage down near the heater and knelt beside it. He didn't open it yet. He didn't reach in. He watched. He counted breaths. The mother dog's shaking eased as warmth returned. One puppy stirred, a tiny paw twitching. Another let out a weak, complaining squeak, offended by survival. Silas exhaled slowly, a habit drilled into him over years of managing fear. He realized then that he had never owned an animal. Never wanted to. Animals made attachments too easily. They trusted without orders. They felt things openly. That kind of honesty had always unsettled him. Still, he reached for his phone. The name Briar Caldwell came up quickly. 33. Local veterinarian. He had noticed her sign when he drove into town earlier, Brightwater Veterinary and Supply, painted in sensible green letters. Nothing fancy. When she answered, her voice was clear, calm, alert, the voice of someone used to emergencies. "I've got a German Shepherd and 3 pups," Silas said. "They were left outside. Hypothermia risk." There was no pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes," she replied. "Don't feed them yet. Keep them warm. Slow." When Briar arrived, she moved with purpose. She was medium height, lean, her brown hair pulled back into a low tie that stayed out of her face. Her skin was lightly freckled, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. She wore a green parka zipped to her chin, black cargo pants, and heavy boots dusted with snow. She didn't waste time on introductions. She knelt immediately, her gloved hands gentle but efficient. "She's young," Briar said as she examined the mother dog. "But she's been through too much." Her fingers paused at the mark on the dog's neck. Her mouth tightened. This wasn't an accident. Silas watched, silent. Outside, the sun continued to shine, bright and cold. Brightwater went about its day, unaware. Inside the cabin, warmth gathered slowly, deliberately. The mother dog lay still now, eyes half closed, her breathing deeper. The puppies pressed closer together, alive. Before Briar left, she looked at Silas carefully. "This isn't the first time," she said. "Dogs like this, left near houses that sell fast?" Silas nodded once. That night, long after Briar had gone, Silas stood by the window. The lake reflected moonlight like steel. Behind him, the dog did not sleep. She lay facing the door, her eyes open, watching. She did not bark. She did not relax. She remembered something the house had taken, and Silas knew, with a certainty that settled heavy in his chest, that whatever it was, it hadn't been left behind. The cabin sat higher than the rest of Brightwater, not by much, but enough to feel separate. From the wide front window, the frozen lake looked like a sheet of hammered steel, dull where snow had settled, sharp where the wind had scraped it clean. Silas Mercer chose the place for its quiet. No close neighbors, no shared walls. Just the sound of wind working the trees, and sometimes the distant creak of ice shifting under its own weight. It was the kind of space that did not ask questions. Inside, the cabin was spare. A small kitchen with chipped counters, a couch that had been mended once too often, a narrow bedroom, and a heater that hummed like an insect trying to stay alive. Silas set the metal cage down near the heat and knelt, careful to keep his movements slow. He had learned long ago that speed made mistakes. He loosened his collar, rolled his shoulders once, and focused on the simple list he kept repeating in his head. Warmth first, water second, nothing else. The German Shepherd mother lay still inside the cage, her body curved protectively around the puppies. In better circumstances, she would have been striking. Black saddle glossy against tan fur, head noble, ears alert. But the cold had dulled her coat and thinned her frame. She looked younger up close, maybe 3 years old, her strength worn down by use rather than age. Her eyes tracked Silas with measured attention. Not fear, not trust. Assessment. Silas draped another blanket over the cage, blocking drafts. He placed a bowl of lukewarm water just within reach and watched, counting breaths again, the way he had been taught to do when someone might not make it through the next few minutes. One puppy stirred, let out a sound that was more complaint than cry, then burrowed deeper into the fur of its mother's chest. Another stretched a paw, tiny and pale, then pulled it back quickly, as if the world were still too cold to touch. Silas exhaled. He had faced storms, gunfire, and men trained to hide their intentions behind calm expressions. This quiet, fragile responsibility, felt different, harder in a way he hadn't anticipated. He reached for a bag of food he'd picked up on the way back, spilled some into a bowl, then froze. He didn't know how much was too much. He didn't know if the puppies could even eat yet. He cursed under his breath, a short, humorless sound, and slid the bowl aside. The spill came next. He tried to pour water into a smaller dish and misjudged the angle. It sloshed across the counter and onto the floor. The noise made him flinch. He wiped it up quickly, irritated with himself. In the field, he could plan down to the second. Here, he was guessing. He took out his phone and called Briar Caldwell. She arrived 20 minutes later, exactly as she'd said she would. Briar was 33, medium height, with a lean build that suggested long days on her feet rather than time at a gym. Her brown hair was pulled back low, practical, a few strands already escaping. Her skin was lightly freckled, pale against the green parka she wore, and her eyes, hazel, sharp, took in the room in seconds. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She knelt immediately beside the cage, her gloved hands steady, her movements efficient without being rough. "Good job keeping them warm," she said, voice calm. "That matters more than people think." She checked the mother first, pressing fingers gently along ribs and shoulders, lifting the dog's lip to look at gums. Her mouth tightened when she reached the faint indentation around the dog's neck. She didn't comment right away. She didn't have to. Silas had seen enough to recognize that look, professional restraint wrapped around anger. "She's dehydrated," Briar said finally. "Undernourished, not starving, but close enough. And she's been bred too often for her age." She looked up at Silas then, really looked at him. This didn't happen by accident. Silas nodded once. He hadn't expected anything else. The puppies were 3, all from the same litter, no more than a few weeks old. One was already squirming toward the water dish with surprising determination, its appetite louder than its fear. Another trembled almost constantly, body light and fragile, as if the cold had soaked into its bones. The third was the smallest. It made no attempt to explore. It pressed itself against its mother's side, then shifted, drawn inexplicably toward Silas's wrist when he leaned closer, its tiny nose brushing his skin as if confirming something only it could sense. Briar noticed. "That one's weak," she said softly, "but alert. Sometimes that's enough." Silas watched the small animal cling to him, unsettled by the instinctive contact. He had never been chosen by anything that couldn't speak. It felt undeserved. They worked in quiet coordination after that. Briar handled what required knowledge, fluids, temperature checks, careful, feeding, while Silas followed instructions precisely, grateful for something concrete to do. When Briar finally straightened, she rolled her shoulders back and removed her gloves, tucking them into her pocket. "I've seen more cases like this lately," she said. "Dogs left out in the cold, usually near houses that sell fast. Owners who move without a trace." She paused. "That's not normal." The heater hummed. Outside, the wind rattled bare branches. Silas filed the information away without comment. He had learned not to speak until the pattern was clear. Briar left just after dark, promising to return in the morning. Silas locked the door behind her and stood for a long moment with his hand on the knob, listening to the quiet settle back into place. He turned off most of the lights and sat on the floor beside the cage, his back against the couch, boots still on. Sleep felt like a luxury he hadn't earned. It was some time later, he wasn't sure how much, that the eow mother dog moved. She lifted her head suddenly, ears pricking, body going tense. The puppies stirred beneath her, sensing the shift. Silas straightened, every muscle alert. He listened. The cabin was still. No footsteps, no engine. Just wind and the faint creak of wood contracting in the cold. The dog rose carefully, positioning herself between the cage door and the front of the cabin. She did not bark. She did not snarl. She stared at the door with a focus so intense it made Silas's skin prickle. Then she lowered her head and pressed her nose to the metal bars, breathing in slow, deliberate pulls, as if searching for a scent that did not belong to the present. Silas felt something turn over inside his chest. He had seen this before, too. Men who woke in the night, bodies rigid, reacting to a threat that existed only in memory and muscle. He reached out without thinking and placed his hand against the side of the cage. The dog did not flinch. After a long moment, she exhaled and lay, back down, though her eyes remained open. The rehook came quietly, without drama, and it stayed with him. The certainty that whatever had been done to her was not finished simply because she had been moved. Morning arrived clean and cold. Sunlight poured through the window, turning the lake into a bright, blinding plain. Silas stood at the window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the town below wake up. From this height, Brightwater looked orderly, peaceful. He wondered how many things could hide in a place like that. A knock came at the door just after 9. The woman standing outside was elderly, small-framed, bundled in a wool coat the color of oatmeal. Her silver hair was pulled into a low bun, neat but unpretentious. Round glasses perched on her nose, and her eyes, clear, assessing, missed very little. She held a tin covered with a red cloth. "I'm Mabel Klein," she said, voice warm but direct. "I own the bakery on Main. Briar called, said you might need soup." Silas stepped aside to let her in. Mabel moved with the confidence of someone who had lived long enough to be comfortable in other people's spaces. She set the tin on the counter and glanced toward the cage, her expression softening. "Poor thing," she murmured. "You can tell when someone's been treated like an object." She looked back at Silas then, head tilting slightly. "You're not from around here." "No," he said. She smiled. "I thought so. We don't usually get men who look like they're still listening for orders." It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Silas didn't correct her. They spoke briefly. Mabel mentioned the town, the weather, the way houses seemed to change hands more often than they used to. She didn't linger. Before she left, she touched Silas's arm lightly, a gesture both kind and deliberate. "Doing the right thing rarely feels convenient," she said, "but it has a way of adding up." After she was gone, Silas sat, again beside the cage. The mother dog watched him, her gaze softer now, less guarded. He thought of the house behind the fence, the way she had stared at it as if it were a wound. He thought of Briar's words, of Mabel's quiet certainty. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a one-time failure of kindness. As the day wore on, Silas felt the shape of something forming just beyond his understanding. A pattern. A question without an answer yet. He didn't know what he would do with it, only that he could no longer pretend it wasn't there. He looked down at the puppies, one eating with reckless enthusiasm, one still shivering, one pressed stubbornly against his wrist, and understood finally that this cabin was no longer a temporary stop. It was the first place where the story had refused to end. Silas waited until mid-morning before returning to the house. In Brightwater, the hour mattered. Early mornings belonged to routine and honesty. Late afternoons belonged to excuses. Mid-morning was when people were awake enough to notice you, but not alert enough to guard every thought. The winter sun hung low but bright, glazing the town in a pale, brittle light that made every shadow look sharper than it truly was. Snow creaked under his boots as he stepped out of the truck, June watching him through the cabin window, her body still, ears angled toward the road as if memorizing every sound he left behind. The house looked different already. That unsettled him more than he expected. 2 days earlier, it had worn its desperation openly. Peeling paint, cardboard boxes scattered across the yard, a hand-lettered sign nailed crookedly to the fence. Now the sign had been replaced. A printed placard from a regional realty company stood straight and clean near the driveway, edges crisp, corners unbent by weather. Sold. The word felt heavier than it should have. Silas stood there longer than necessary, studying the fence line, the gate, the place where the rusted cage had sat hidden from the main road. The ground was swept clean, snow disturbed, and then smoothed again, as if someone had been careful not to leave a story behind. He knocked once, then again. No answer. Through the front window, he saw emptiness. No boxes, no furniture, nothing left to suggest anyone had lived there at all. The owner, the man who had refused to meet his eyes while handing over the cage, had vanished as neatly as the sign had changed. Silas felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet irritation that came when a pattern refused to show itself clearly. He did not force the door. Forcing things too early had never ended well. He turned away and followed the street downhill toward Maine, where the town pretended to be ordinary. Bright water smelled like yeast and coffee in the late morning, the kind of smell that belonged to places people trusted. The bakery sat on the corner across from the post office, its windows fogged with warmth. A bell chimed when Silas stepped inside, and heat wrapped around him so suddenly it made his shoulders tense, as if warmth itself might be a trap. Mabel Klein stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands dusted white with flour. She was small and straight-backed despite her age, her silver hair twisted into a bun so tight it looked like it might snap if she laughed too hard. Round glasses perched low on her nose, magnifying eyes that missed very little. She looked up at him, took in his height, his posture, the way he scanned the room before settling on her, and gave a brief nod. "You're new," she said, not unkindly. Her voice had the steady confidence of someone who had spoken to the same people for decades and learned when words mattered and when they did not. "Passing through," Silas replied. He chose his words carefully. Passing through sounded less permanent, less threatening. He ordered coffee he did not want and stood aside while she poured it, her movements efficient, unhurried. She slid the cup across the counter and studied him again. "That's what they all say," she said. "Some of them even mean it." Silas let the corner of his mouth lift, not quite a smile. "I was looking for the owner of the gray house on Cedar Ridge," he said, as if it were a casual thought. "The one that was for sale." Mabel's hands paused for half a second. Most people would not have noticed. Silas did. She resumed kneading dough, fingers pressing and folding with practiced strength. "Which one?" she asked, though there were only 3 houses on that stretch of road. "The one that sold yesterday?" Mabel exhaled through her nose. "Things move fast these days," she said. "People don't like to linger." Silas waited. Silence was often more useful than questions. After a moment, she set the dough aside and leaned her forearms on the counter. Up close, he could see the fine lines etched around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun and snow for many winters. Her gaze slid toward the window, then back to him. "You didn't hear this from me," she said, though there was no one else in the shop. "But that house isn't the first, or the second." His pulse slowed, focus sharpening. "How many?" "Enough to notice." She wiped her hands on her apron. "A string of quick sales, always winter, always cash. Folks clear out like they're late for a train." "Any reason given?" Mabel shrugged. "Sickness? Debt? Family back east? Pick one." Her mouth tightened. "Funny thing is, the moving trucks come at night. Big ones, no logos. They don't stay long." Silas felt the shape of the problem forming, though its edges were still blurred. "What do they load?" She met his eyes directly now. "Whatever they don't want. Seen in daylight." The bell chimed again as a customer entered, breaking the moment. Mabel straightened, the conversation folding itself away as neatly as dough into a pan. Silas took his coffee and left without another word. Outside, the air bit at his lungs, welcome in its honesty. When he drove back up the hill, June met him at the door before he had even shut the engine off. She stood rigid, body angled toward the road, ears high and forward. At the distant growl of a diesel engine somewhere below, her muscles bunched as if preparing for flight or fight. The sound faded. She did not relax. That was the first time Silas felt it, a flicker of something that had nothing to do with training or instinct. Call it intuition, call it memory. He knelt and rested a hand on the floor, letting her approach on her terms. She did not press into him. She only placed her nose against his knuckles, breath warm, eyes fixed on the window. He spoke softly, testing the sound. "It's all right," he said, though he was no longer certain it was. That evening, as the sky dimmed into steel blue and the lake below the cabin froze solid under a skin of ice, Silas made a decision he had been avoiding. He named them. Naming made things real, and reality had a way of demanding responsibility. He touched the mother's collar lightly. "June," he said, the word fitting her calm endurance. She did not react, but her breathing slowed. The pups were easier. The bold one who lunged for food he called Pip. The quiet one who trembled at sudden sounds he named Wren. The smallest, who curled against his wrist whenever he sat down, became Cedar, steady and rooted despite his size. The night came clear and cold. Silas woke just after midnight, the way he always did, body responding to a sound his mind had not yet named. June stood at the foot of the bed, hackles raised, head low. She was not barking. She was listening. Outside, moonlight silvered the snow. 2 dark lines cut across it, fresh tire tracks, deep and deliberate, leading past the cabin before disappearing into the trees. Silas pulled on his boots and jacket, heart steady, mind already cataloging angles and distances. June followed him to the door and stopped, releasing a low, measured growl, not a warning to attack, but a signal. "Wake up. Pay attention." He crouched and pressed his forehead briefly to hers, an old habit of acknowledgement. Then he stood, eyes on the tracks, the town below, wrapped in silence thick enough to hide secrets. Silas waited until the road dried enough to hide tracks before driving into town. The snow had softened overnight, losing its sharpness, turning from a warning into a veil. Northlight Haven sat just beyond Brightwater's southern edge, framed by pines trimmed so neatly they looked rehearsed. The building itself was low and wide, painted a calm, institutional white, with large windows that reflected the sky more than the world around them. A polished sign stood at the entrance. Northlight Haven, rescue, rehabilitate, rehome. The words were evenly spaced, the lettering unblemished, as if no one had ever hesitated while placing them there. June did not like the place. She began to whine softly the moment Silas slowed the truck, her body shifting closer to the pups as if the air itself had changed texture. Pip pawed at the crate door with restless curiosity. Cedar pressed against Silas's wrist through the bars, and Wren trembled in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Silas noticed all of it. He always noticed patterns before people noticed intent. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and something floral meant to soften it. The floors gleamed. The walls held framed photographs of smiling volunteers with animals that looked clean and grateful. Too grateful, Silas thought. A woman approached them from behind the reception desk with a measured stride, heels clicking softly. Dr. Corinne Vale was exactly what the brochures promised. Early 40s, tall without being imposing, slender in a way that suggested discipline rather than fragility. Her hair, light brown with hints of gold, was pulled back into a smooth knot at the nape of her neck, not a strand out of place. She wore a charcoal wool coat over a cream blouse, and leather gloves she removed with deliberate care, as if even warmth needed permission. Mr. Mercer, she said, extending her hand. Her smile was warm, practiced, and brief, like a signal light. We've been expecting you. Silas did not shake her hand right away. He met her eyes first. They were pale gray, reflective, the kind that seemed to absorb emotion without holding it. I didn't call ahead, he said. She nodded, unfazed. In a town this size, concern travels faster than vehicles. She glanced toward the crate. And compassion rarely stays secret. She led them down a corridor lined with glass-fronted rooms. Inside each were animals resting on identical bedding, each enclosure labeled with a number and a barcode. No names, no toys. Everything was quiet, not peaceful, controlled. June's ears flattened. A low sound vibrated in her chest, barely audible. Corinne paused, turning back with an understanding tilt of her head. She's anxious, Corinne said gently. That's common in intake cases. Trauma leaves echoes. Or instincts, Silas replied. Corinne's smile did not change. Of course, that's why we're here, to translate those echoes into healing. She stopped beside an office door and gestured inside. Please? The office was spare and immaculate. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet. On the wall hung certifications, awards, letters of appreciation from regional councils. Corinne sat, folding her hands. Silas remained standing. He felt the room's geometry immediately. Who was meant to sit, who was meant to yield. We can take June and the puppies today, Corinne said, her voice low and reassuring. We have heated kennels, neonatal support, behavioral specialists. They'll receive professional care. They're already receiving care, Silas said. Temporary care, she corrected softly. With respect, you're not trained for this, and attachment can complicate outcomes. That word, outcomes, hung between them. Silas pictured the numbered cages, the barcodes, the absence of names. They're not inventory, he said. Corinne's expression shifted by a fraction. They're lives, she agreed, which is why procedure matters. Emotion without structure can do harm. A knock sounded. Briar Caldwell stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold, parka unzipped, hair escaping its tie. She looked at Silas first, relief flickering across her face, then at Corinne, posture tightening. Briar was in her early 30s, athletic, with hands that bore faint scars from years of handling frightened animals. Her eyes, hazel, sharp, missed nothing. I won't stay, Briar said quickly. Just wanted to drop off labs. She placed a folder on the desk. Corinne thanked her without looking at it. We were just discussing intake, she said. Briar's gaze moved to the crate. She crouched, meeting June at eye level, letting the dog see her hands. June did not growl, but she did not soften either. Briar straightened slowly. She's not ready, Briar said. And neither are the pups. Corinne sighed, the sound carefully modulated. You always did struggle with boundaries, Briar. Briar's jaw set. I struggle with places that look perfect and feel empty. The room cooled. Silas felt it then, the rehook moment, when June stood abruptly, pressing her body against the crate door, eyes fixed on the corridor outside the office. A cart rolled past, stacked with clean, numbered crates. June let out a single, sharp bark, not fear, recognition. Corinne recovered first. Animals project, she said lightly. Stress manifests as pattern-seeking. Silas looked at the barcodes again. Or memory. He declined the offer, calmly, clearly. Corinne accepted it with a nod that promised nothing and everything. If you change your mind, she said, sliding a card across the desk, we're always open. Outside, the sky had dimmed. As Silas loaded the crate, he noticed a white slip of paper tucked beneath his windshield wiper. No logo, no signature. Just 4 words, printed neatly. Return the animals. June stared at the building until they drove. Away, her reflection caught in the glass like a warning that had learned how to wait. The snow had thinned into a hard white crust by late morning, the kind that reflected sunlight so sharply it made the world feel overexposed. Silas welcomed it. Clear light revealed things shadows could hide. He took June out first, keeping the pups bundled inside, and let her lead. She did not pull wildly or scatter her attention. She moved with intent, head low, nostrils flaring as if the air itself were a map only she could read. When she stopped completely, muscles locked, eyes fixed toward the tree line beyond the ridge. The garage sat half-buried at the edge of an old service road, its roof sagging under years of snow and neglect. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. June approached it slowly, tail stiff, then turned back to Silas and huffed once, short, controlled. Inside, the smell hit him immediately. Old food turned sour, cold metal, the unmistakable sharpness of dried canine waste. Not a shelter, a holding place. Silas did not step in. He never rushed. Enclosed spaces without reason. He circled instead, photographing tire marks, a partial license plate etched faintly into ice, scraps of real estate paperwork stuffed beneath a loose plank. Addresses, dates, cash amounts circled in pen. The rehook came when June froze again, this time not at a sound, but at a memory. She backed away from the door, hackles rising, then sat abruptly at Silas's heel, pressing her shoulder into his leg as if bracing for something that had already happened. He felt it then, the weight of repetition, the echo of a system that moved animals like inventory, houses like shells. He pocketed the documents and listened. 2 men appeared at the far end of the road, silhouettes first, then details. Heavy coats, knit caps pulled low, boots meant for work, not walking. One was broad and thick-necked, stubble shadowing a jaw that had learned to push forward. The other was leaner, restless, eyes darting. Silas did not confront them. He shifted his position so the sun flared off his windshield, blinding from their angle, and slid quietly back toward the truck. He locked the garage door from the outside with a length of chain he found nearby, not to trap, only to slow. He kicked a loose panel so it clattered loudly, then moved away, letting sound misdirect. Snow began to fall again, fine and fast, the first edge of a storm. By the time the local cruiser arrived, Officer Miles Turner, tired eyes under a knit cap, the road was already softening, details blurring. Turner listened, nodded, took photos, promised to file a report. The storm would delay everything. It always did. When Silas returned to the cabin, the silence inside felt wrong. He checked the pups immediately. Pip and Wren slept tangled together. Cedar's blanket had been pulled just enough to expose his shoulder to the cold air. No bark, no break-in, just a message delivered by absence. Silas adjusted the blanket, jaw tight, and sat with them until June lay down again, her breath steadying the room. The town hall of Brightwater had never been meant for conflict. It was built for seasonal announcements, bake sale tallies, the quiet swearing in of volunteer firefighters. Its wooden benches bore the smooth shine of years of palms, resting, not fists clenching. That morning, however, the air felt heavier, as if the building itself sensed it was being asked to hold something sharper than routine. Snow fell outside in patient sheets, muting the world beyond the frosted windows, while inside the radiators hissed and knocked like uneasy throats clearing themselves. Silas sat near the back, June lying at his feet, her body curved protectively toward the small crate where the pups rested. He wore the same muted camouflage he always did, clean but worn at the edges, the kind of clothing that did not ask for attention, yet drew it anyway. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, hands loose on his knees. To anyone watching closely, there was a stillness about him that came from long habits of restraint, not fear. June mirrored that stillness, her ears half lifted, eyes scanning the room with quiet vigilance. At the front sat Dr. Corinne Vale. She looked immaculate, as she always did, charcoal coat draped neatly over the chair back, cream blouse untouched by the morning's tension. Her hair was smoothed into its precise knot, her face composed into an expression of professional concern. She did not glare at Silas. She did not need to. Her power lay in procedure, in the language of policy that turned living things into paragraphs and clauses. When she spoke, it was with the measured calm of someone accustomed to being believed. "This is not personal," Corinne said, addressing the temporary magistrate seated at the folding table. "Northlight Haven is responsible for the welfare of animals surrendered or recovered within county limits. Mr. Mercer has refused to return property that was clearly marked for rescue intake." She paused, letting the word property settle. "We are concerned about the animal's safety and about precedent." Silas did not move. He had learned long ago that silence could be a shield. The magistrate, a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose, nodded once, fingers steepled. Her nameplate read Judge Helen Arkwright, though this was not a courtroom in the strict sense. It was a hearing, temporary and local, the law stripped to its bones and held together by common sense and community memory. Briar Caldwell stood when called. She wore her forest green parka, snow still clinging to the hem, and held a thick folder against her chest. Her face was open but firm, freckles standing out against skin flushed from the cold. She had the look of someone used to speaking for those who could not speak back. When she described June's condition, hypothermia on intake, dehydration, evidence of forced breeding, her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Facts carried their own weight. "These injuries don't happen overnight," Briar said, meeting the judge's eyes. "They happen in systems, repeatedly." She glanced once at Corinne, not accusatory, simply observant. June wasn't surrendered for care. She was discarded. A murmur rippled through the benches. Mabel Klein rose next, steadying herself with one hand on the aisle. In the daylight of the hall, she looked smaller, her beige coat hanging loosely from narrow shoulders, but her eyes were sharp behind round glasses. She spoke plainly, without embellishment, about the houses sold in haste, the trucks that came after dark, the way people stopped asking questions because questions made life harder. Her testimony did not accuse. It illuminated. Silas was called last. He placed photographs on the table, tire tracks, the sagging garage, scraps of real estate paperwork marked with dates that lined up too neatly to be coincidence. He spoke briefly, voice low, controlled, describing what he had seen and what he had chosen not to do. "I didn't confront anyone," he said. "I documented. I waited. Because rushing creates mistakes." The re-hook came not from words, but from a sound. A small, frightened whine cut through the room. Pip, startled by the scrape of a chair, had lost control, a dark stain spreading beneath him on the floor. For a moment, no one spoke. The smell was faint but unmistakable, a reminder that fear did not respect decorum. June stood instantly, placing herself between the pup and the watching crowd, her body a living barrier. Silas knelt without thinking, murmuring softly, his hand steady as he cleaned and soothed. The room exhaled. Paperwork felt suddenly fragile in the face of something so undeniably alive. Judge Arkwright watched the scene with an expression that softened despite itself. When she spoke again, it was quieter. "The court finds that Mr. Mercer may retain temporary guardianship of the animal," she said. "An investigation into Northlight Haven's intake practices is authorized, effective immediately." She looked at Silas, then at Corinne. "Transparency is not optional." Corinne inclined her head, smile intact, but eyes colder. Silas felt June relax against his leg, just slightly. As people began to stand and gather their coats, the judge leaned toward him and spoke under her breath, a sentence meant for one pair of ears. "Light has a way of making people uncomfortable," she said. "Be prepared for that." Outside, the snow had stopped. Brightwater lay hushed and watchful, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Silas stepped into the cold with June at his side, the pups quiet now, and understood that whatever came next would not be fought in shadows any more. Night arrived without ceremony, the way it often did in the north, clean, cold, and certain of itself. The cabin on the hill held a single square of light against the dark, its windows glowing like a quiet promise. Silas moved through the rooms with practiced calm, checking the locks, setting the sensor lights, glancing once at the monitors humming softly on the desk. June lay near the hearth, her head up, ears angled forward, the pups sleeping in a loose, breathing knot behind her. Spring was close, he could feel it in the dampness beneath the snow, but winter still had teeth. He did not hear the truck at first, he felt it, a pressure in the air, a shift in June's posture so subtle it might have been missed by anyone who hadn't learned to read stillness as language. Her tail lowered, not tucked, but purposeful. She rose without sound and moved to the door, pausing there as if waiting for permission. Silas nodded once. He had learned to trust that nod as much as any plan. The headlights crested the rise and died. Figures stepped out, 3 of them, bundled shapes that believed anonymity was a kind of armor. One was tall and angular, movements economical, another broader, heavy in the shoulders. The third lingered, uncertain. June slipped out into the snow like a shadow made of breath, angling away from the cabin toward the open field. She did not bark. She ran just fast enough to be noticed, then slowed, looking back once. The oldest trick in the book, learned not from training but from survival. Draw the threat away from the vulnerable. Silas did not rush. He triggered the lights. White flooded the slope, stripping the night of its excuses. Cameras clicked awake, red dots steady. He spoke quietly into his phone. The state police line answered faster than the local ever could. He gave coordinates, descriptions, and then he waited, keeping his body between the cabin and the dark. The rehook came when June stopped running. She planted herself in the open. Snow turned and faced them, not with bared teeth, but with a stillness so complete it made the men hesitate. In that pause, one of them raised his voice, sharp with frustration, and said a name, not June's, Corinne's. The word fell wrong, like a key forced into the wrong lock. Silas felt the shape of the truth settle. This wasn't retrieval. It was cleanup. A shout, a step forward. June moved again, darting wide, keeping distance, never letting them close enough to grab. The sensor lights flared as one man crossed an invisible line, and the cameras caught everything. The plates, the faces, the moment the broader man slipped and went down hard, the sound of breath leaving a body unprepared for the cold. Sirens cut the night, thin at first, then real. The men scattered. June angled back toward the cabin, drawing them just long enough. By the time the cruisers arrived, the field held only tracks and a dropped glove. The officers moved with brisk efficiency, one kneeling to examine the glove, another scanning the tree line. Silas stood with June at his side, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, feeling the tremor leave her frame as the danger passed. Inside the cabin, the pups stirred, then settled again, the smallest letting out a single indignant squeak before sleep reclaimed him. Morning brought the unraveling. Warrants moved faster when the evidence was clean. Records linked Northlight Haven to a shell of third-party breeders, intake numbers that never matched outcomes, contracts written to look like care and behave like commerce. Corinne Vale was arrested at her office, still immaculate, still composed, until the door closed and the calm had nowhere left to hide. Brightwater watched without cheering. There was relief and there was grief, and there was the quieter work of deciding what to do next. Silas signed the adoption papers in a room that smelled faintly of coffee and copy toner. His hand did not shake. June sat beside him, her eyes tracking the pen, the page, the small finality of a signature that changed everything. Pip gnawed on a shoelace. Cedar slept through the moment. Faith absolute. Wren watched Silas with a seriousness that felt older than his weeks. Spring arrived as if it had been waiting its turn. Snow retreated from the south-facing slopes, revealing dark earth and the first stubborn shoots of green. The lake cracked and sighed, letting light back into itself. Silas built a fence, not to keep the world out, but to keep the pups in, and learned the small rituals that make days hold together. Feedings at dawn, training in the afternoon, the long quiet of evening when June would sit on the porch and watch the town below, not as a threat, but as a horizon. One afternoon, Silas framed the old paper sign. The ink had run where snow had melted on it. The word free blurred into something softer. He hung it inside the cabin, near the door, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Free was not a price. It was a responsibility. When the light shifted toward gold and the hill filled with birdsong, Silas sat with June and the pups at his feet and felt the strange arithmetic of rescue settle into balance. He had stopped that first day because stopping had been the only honest thing to do. He stayed because staying had changed him. And June, who had been discarded as inventory, had chosen in the darkest hour to become a shield. The rescued had become the rescuer. Sometimes that was all a miracle needed, a decision to stand and a willingness to be led. Sometimes a miracle doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes on an ordinary road, in ordinary cold, when a tired heart decides to stop instead of passing by. Maybe that's how God often works in the everyday. Quietly, patiently, through a small act of mercy that feels too simple to matter. A cage becomes a doorway. A free sign becomes a reminder that love is never merchandise. And the ones we think we save end up saving the broken places in us, piece by piece, until home feels alive again. If this story touched something in you, let it travel. Share it with someone who needs hope today. In the comments, tell us where you're watching from and what small miracle has found you in your own life, even if it looked ordinary at first. And if you want more stories like this, where courage meets compassion and light returns in the most human ways, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God bless you, protect your home, and place kindness in your path when you need it most. May He keep your heart soft in a hard world, and may the miracles meant for you never pass by unnoticed.